Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to export data from an Excel spreadsheet and store it in a text file. So a text file is kind of a generic file format that can be used by any number of applications. And I'll export the data just by using the Save As feature in Excel. Then once the data has been exported, I'm going to open up a spreadsheet with a similar set of data and use the macro recorder and let it record the steps that need to be done in order to change the appearance of the data. So I'll be doing a number of things like changing font sizes, changing columns, applying currency format, and all those steps that I go through manually will be recorded and translated into VBA code. Okay, so I had previously given you a video that was just a real brief introduction to Visual Basic for applications. The intent was with that video just to make you aware that there was an embedded programming language called VBA and give you some sense of what it was like to program in this language. So you can either, if you're an experienced programmer, write your own program code using Visual Basic for applications, or to a limited degree you can use the Excel macro recorder, which will generate VBA code. So what I want to do in this, since this is a non-programming class, is just show you how to use the VBA recorder. So we'll record a data set that represents January property expenses for, I think, 3 different properties. Then once that's done, I will import the data that was previously exported into the text file. I'll import that data as February data, and when I import it, it will be pretty rough. The columns won't be the correct size. The fonts that I use won't be what I want. So what I'll do is then run the macro recorder. That is to say, I'll execute the VBA code that was generated from step 2 and apply it to that February data set. And then finally what you'll see is that every month when I get a new set of data, so long as it conforms to the original format of the data that was used in the recording of the VBA macro, thereafter every month when I need the data, I can import it from a text file and transform it into something that's much easier to look at and work with in an Excel spreadsheet. So let's see how this all works out. If I go to a folder where I have everything already set up, I have a spreadsheet that contains the data that represents February expenses. And what I'm going to do is export this or save it as a text file. So I'm going to use the Save As option. I'm going to browse for the folder where I want to save it, and it's remembering the folder I was last accessing, and that's the folder I want to use, so that's fine. And then since I want to save this in a text format, I'm going to have to change the file type, and I'm going to use tab delimited text. Okay, so we had talked about what a delimiter was previously, and that's just a special character that separates things. Okay, and so as that text data is imported, there will be a special character that will allow the spreadsheet program to see where one column of data is separated from another column of data. So I'll use tab delimited data and save. Okay. Now it's going to come back and say that it will not save multiple worksheets, but rather if I click OK, it's going to save the active sheet. Okay, so it won't save sheet 2, but it will save sheet 1, and sheet 1 is the one I want to save, so I'll say OK. And then finally it's telling me that when it translates this into a text file format, there may be some information, some data lost in the process, and ask me, do I want to continue on? And I'll say yes. At which point, then I'm done with this spreadsheet. And if I go back to the folder that I had open previously, you'll see there's a file with a .txt file extension. And if I open that, it'll open it in a standard Windows application called Notepad, and this is the data that's stored in that text file. And again, this is a very generic file format that can be used by any number of applications, including Excel. So I'm going to close that up, and the next step in the process is going to be to open a second spreadsheet and record all the steps necessary to transform this data into something that's easier to read. So I open the spreadsheet, and here's my data set. Now this format is exactly the same format as was previously seen, the data that represented February data. It's the same format that the data will be in the text file. So I start with this rather crude format, and I'm going to transform it. I'm going to make the columns wider. I'm going to adjust the fonts. I'm going to do a number of things to make the data more readable. And all the time that I'm doing that, I'm going to be having the Excel macro recorder interpret what I'm doing and translate that into Visual Basic code. Then that Visual Basic code will be stored in the spreadsheet, and in the future when I import another set of property data for a different month, then I can apply those same formatting characteristics to any future set of data just by running the macro. I won't have to manually go in and do things month by month. Okay, so what am I going to do? First thing I'm going to do is park the cell pointer up here in cell A1. Not really a necessary thing at all, but I'm going to do it anyway. Then I'm going to go to the Developer tab. So I had shown you in the video that demonstrated VBA code how to turn on the Developer tab. You'll have to do that first. And with the Developer page available, I've got an option to record a macro. And so I'll make that selection. I'll give it a name, and I'm just going to call this macro format property data. And I can store this macro in this workbook, or I can create a brand new workbook that will store all my macros. So if I want to create a library of macros, I can create a library of macros in a separate workbook. But for our purposes, we're going to just store the macros in this current workbook, and then the macros, the VBA code, can be executed on any of the worksheets within the workbook, but only worksheets within this workbook. So the scope's going to be limited just to this workbook. And I'm going to say formats monthly property data imported from text files. So I put in whatever comments are necessary to remind me what this does. I can also use shortcut keys, so I have to be careful doing this that I don't override some other shortcut keys that I routinely use. Like routinely I use Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste, and so forth. So I want to avoid those, because within this scope, if I were to use Control-C, then it would override the copy command and execute this macro instead. So I do not use Control-P, although that is for formatting for printing, but I'm going to go ahead and use it anyway. So I'm going to use Control-P, and now I'll be able to invoke this macro one of two ways, either by using this combined keystroke, or, so that would be Control plus Shift plus P keys, or I can also invoke it just from the menu by making a menu selection, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to say OK to that. And so at this point, the recorder is on, and it's going to stay on until I stop. Now, I'm going to go through all the steps that I want to routinely perform in formatting these monthly expense data sets. If I make a mistake, it's not a big deal. All I have to do is correct the mistakes, and the mistake will be recorded, and the correction will also be recorded, and the end result will be that, you know, it works out fine. It may translate into somewhat less efficient VBA code, but nevertheless, it's not going to be problematic in any way. So what do I want to do? Well, first thing I want to do is apply some currency formatting here. And so you've seen this done before. And I'm also going to spread these columns out a little bit. So I'll highlight all these columns, and on the home page, on the cells ribbon, choose formatting, column width. Now I've used the auto column width to make the columns just wide enough to store everything that needs to display everything that's stored. I can also use this option, and I'll specify how many characters wide I want each of these columns. So I'm just going to say 20, set all the columns so that they can display 20 characters. And then I'm going to highlight these three columns and change the alignment, since they're column headings for these numeric columns. I'm going to align them to the right. I'm going to bold the title and the column headings. I'm going to bold the summary information at the bottom, and I'm going to change the font size on this from 11 to 14, and then once I do that, I'm going to apply the merge and center feature. So these are all things that you should know how to do already. I'm going to change the individual expense values here and have them display in blue. Okay, so you know, there's any number of things that I could do here, but maybe I'll just throw in some data bars too. How's that? That's easy enough to do. So do a little conditional formatting with data bars, and click there. Okay, so there is my January data that has been reformatted to make it more readable. And those are all the steps I want to go through. So what I'm going to do is go back to the developer page and stop the recording. Okay. Now that program code is stored within this spreadsheet, and then if I want to apply it in the future, instead of having to go through all these manual steps, I can just simply invoke the macro, and it will do it automatically. It'll do it programmatically, actually. All right, so I'm going to switch over here to sheet 2, and I'm going to rename this February. Okay, I'm going to park the cell pointer up here in cell A1. Again, not really a necessary step, but I'll just put it in home cell. And then what I want to demonstrate is how to import the data from a text file. So I had previously saved that February data. We'll pretend that, it actually didn't get saved that way. We'll pretend that we have some sort of enterprise database management system, and we're able to capture the data and export it from the corporate database. And at some point every month, this data is available to me in a text file format. And so every month when I want to add the next expenses, I can simply go to the data page and choose to get internal data or external data from text. I have to know where that data is, so I'm going to have to navigate to the folder where the data is stored. And there's the data that I previously exported. So we'll pretend this again is data that came from some other source, and I'll make that selection and tell it to import. Now at this point it runs a wizard or an automated menu system and says, how do you want to go about this importing process? I want to use delimited data because if you recall, when I executed the save as command, I saved it as tab delimited data. It wants to know what kind of delimiter is being used, so not comma, not space, but tab. And I'll just click next. It gives me a preview of how it's going to arrange things in columns, which is exactly what I want. And wants to know what format I want. General format is fine. You can read the details of these, but general is what I want. And I'll say finish. And then it wants to know, where do you want to begin importing? Well, I put the cell pointer in cell A1 to begin with, so it's suggesting that as the point at which it will begin importing the data, which is exactly what I want. And there's the data, and it looks to the world like the data did previously. Okay, so that should look familiar. And then at this point, if I want to transform this data so that it looks like this, I need to go through all the formatting steps that I did manually here, or execute the macro that I previously recorded. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the developer tab. This time click on the macro tool, and any macros that I've previously created are going to show up here. I will execute the run button, and there we have it. It has followed the same steps that I showed here and applied them to this new data set. So again, so long as these data sets are structured the same way when they're imported, then this macro will transform them regardless of the data itself. It'll transform them so that they all look the same. And there you have it. You have an example of how to take data that's in a spreadsheet and save it in a generic file type called text. When it's in a text file format, it can be used by any number of applications. And then I also demonstrated how to import data from a text file, so just actually moving the data the other direction. So we take data that's stored in a text file and import it into a spreadsheet. And I've also demonstrated how to use the macro recorder in order to record steps that you might go through on a routine basis. So if every month, again, I get a new set of data, but it's all structured exactly the same way, and every month I want to dress it up so that it's, you know, available for someone to read, then rather than having to go through those steps manually month after month after month, I can record the steps that I go through using the macro recorder. That code is saved within the spreadsheet in a language called VBA, Visual Basic for Applications. And then in the future, I can execute those instructions on a raw data set, and it will always transform it so that it looks, you know, consistent. And that is everything I wanted to show you.